Hello, Marion Barnwell. I am thrilled to be able to speak with you about your new book, just published, All the Things We Didn't Say, a kind of double memoir of yours and your grandmother's. So let's start out by you just telling us a little bit more about this book.
Okay, Karen, it's so good to see you. Yes, the book came out a couple of months ago, almost exactly 2 months ago, published by University Press of Mississippi. So it just has so many ties to dream work. As you know, I was in your dream group for over 20 years, and I was a good student. I learned my lessons. So I'd like to tell about the book and then tie it into two dream fragments that were instrumental in bringing the book into being.
Perfect.
Okay, so in 2020, we were all under a lot of stress because of COVID. We know that. And there were two personal crises going on in my family at the same time. And of course, we had political uproars here and there. So I woke up in early morning before dawn one morning with having had a dream. And it was one of those dreams that just you sit up in bed, you just know it's important. Even
Yes.
though it's a very short dream, I knew from long experience that it had something to tell me. And the dream goes like this. I'm on a trip with Ganny. Ganny is my grandmother, whose memoir is here along with mine. We're going to talk about that in a minute. I'm on a trip with Ganny, maybe a treatment for her. Immersion in water. I make sure she's all right. That's the dream. It was all words. There were no images. It was a dream message. So I thought that would be, I'd love to get your take on that. So I was thinking about these fragments and I started rereading Jeremy Taylor. He has that wonderful book on dream work. And he said sometimes fragments are not fragments at all, but edited versions of longer dreams. And
Brilliant.
you know that. But
yeah,
in other words, when the dream maker really wants us to pay attention, instead of giving us this long winding dream that we have to decipher, sometimes it's just a short edited thing. So every one of these sentences, it almost reads like a poem, 4 sentences, and every one of them is important. And so I woke up, I got up, I went to the front room where the secretary was. I've moved since then, but I inherited the secretary from my mother, and I knew that Ganny's memoir was in there. So I went into the drawers and found her memoir, and she wrote it in 1956 when she was 77 years old. Turned out, without my realizing it, that when I started my memoir, I was 77 years old. Now, there were all kinds of little hints like that this was what I was supposed to do. So keep that in mind. So I started thinking, okay, I'm supposed to find out about my grandmother. That was my first impulse. I just wanted to reread the memoir and figure out why the dream had guided me to it. I reread it. And back, I don't know when I read it before, probably I was 14. And I just regarded it as a sacred document of my grandmother's life. And it is that. It very much is that. She talks about so many little historical happenings in Verona and Okolona and Tupelo, where she lived, all those places. But when I read it in the midst of this crisis, I thought, she hadn't told me anything that I want to know. She hadn't given me any wisdom. She hadn't given me any sense of what you do in a time of crisis. In other words, I noticed that every time she got close to telling something important, she would evade the issue.
Yes.
And of course, she was a woman of her time. She was born in 1876, and her mother was a Victorian through and through. I found that out later. So I realized that the memoir was not going to tell me what I needed to know. But beyond that, it just made me mad. I mean, I just got mad at her. I was just so irritated with her for skirting all the important issues. Now, another thing we need to know about Ganny is that she moved into our home right before I was born, and she lived with us until she died when I was a junior in college. So she was with me all those years of growing up.
Yes.
But the critical importance, that sounds like, oh, nice granddaughter relationship. Well, we were close in some ways. We were close physically because her bedroom was usually adjacent to mine in the houses we lived in, 2 houses we lived in. But we did not talk about the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room was that both my mother and my father were alcoholic.
Yes.
So, and I have this one scene that just is seared in my memory. It was a Sunday morning, and the house felt really empty because the maid and the cook didn't come on Sunday. My sister had gone off to college, and then all of a sudden, again, I was sitting in her room in the back, facing each other, and we heard all this hollering and hooping, and it was my mother and daddy partying with their friends. And she would look to the left, and I would look to the right, and we tried to just unhear them, and of course we couldn't. So then when I explored her memoir, I got madder and madder, and it was irrational because, really, how can you be mad at someone who's been gone for many, many years? It's hard to keep that up. And I thought, what are you doing, you crazy person? You can't just keep, ranting about your grandmother and how she didn't reveal anything. And it occurred to me that I was meant to write my own memoir as well. So I took a deep breath and started writing my own. And that's why we have 2 memoirs here.
What courage that took, Marion. Just I want to just acknowledge that. I just want to acknowledge how much courage it takes to write one, to write an honest memoir.
Yes, it did. It did take courage, but at the same time, it's the most liberating thing I've ever done.
Oh, bravo. Congratulations.
And it helped with all of my interfamily relationships. It just did. It just shifted so much. And partly because I had to realize that the reason I was so mad at Ganny is that she didn't say the things she needed to say. And guess who else didn't say all the things I needed to say to members of my family.
Yes.
So I learned to, speak my truth better because of that. And that kind of authenticity always improves family dynamics, of course.
Of course.
Yes. So the second dream, I'll just go ahead and tell it, and we can then go back to the first dream. The second, I started losing confidence and thinking, gosh, I'm being so disloyal, because mainly my mother gave me difficulty with, her alcoholism, and also she just didn't have a sense of purpose, and it was very hard to be with her. So I thought, oh, this just feels so disloyal, and I started losing my nerve because I just didn't want to talk about my mother. And I thought, well, you can't do this if you don't talk about your mother. It wouldn't make any more sense than Candy's memoir made. So about that time I had the second dream, and it was essentially important too. And it's very simple. And it goes like this. Ganny and I are mulching and fertilizing the tree outside her window. And that's it. But that was enough to give me courage to say, she approves of this, and you're mulching and fertilizing the family tree, and it's going to be worth it. So now, if we go back to dream 1, I'm on a trip with Ganny. Well, I explicated this in my memoir, but I'm going to tell you some of the things I thought and said at that time, and maybe we can think about it some more. Well, I'm on a psychological trip with Ganny.
You bet. Yes.
I'm on a psychological journey with Ganny. And as I see the things about her that I don't, that give me problems, I have to see them about myself. So that's all interwoven. Now, the interesting thing is the next 3 lines, maybe a treatment for her immersion in water. I make sure she's all right. in her memoir, she's so careful not to show her feelings. I mean, she gives an account of one of her brothers going to put hyacinths on his grave. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. In a few pages, she talks about sitting on a fence post with him. So how did this happen? And in that secretary, I found some genealogical charts and so on, and found out there were two brothers, one of whom died when he was a year old. But it was so murky the way she described it. You could just tell that she was still grieving and she didn't know how to express it. And so she just said, well, the weather was cold and frosty. She just went right to the weather, and just that was the way she closed that segment of the memoir. And so that went on in several places. When she'd get to something sticky, she would just evade.
Yeah.
Except for one time. And this one time was when her father, who seemed to be a very likable man, her mother seemed to be extremely strict with her, but her father was always taking her different places or bringing her things back he brought a roll of toilet paper back from the Astor Hotel in New York, because nobody back then had toilet paper. So he had dropsy, which is congestive heart failure. Mm-hmm. And I seem to be having it right now. So, excuse me, his brother-in-law told him about Indian Springs, Georgia, that he had been there for a cure. It's kind of like Warm Springs, but apparently a different kind of cure. Mm-hmm. So my grandmother goes with him on this trip to Indian Springs, Georgia. And in her account, she livens up and she gets downright chatty. It's a different tone altogether. And she said, we did everything I couldn't do at home. Played cards, danced, everything. And then she confides, and as she's writing this memoir, theoretically, for her 5 children. And she starts telling about this young man, a medical student, whom she kind of fell in love with while she was there. Now, this is strange that she's confessing something after all these tight-lipped moments and passages.
Yes.
That all of a sudden she's just confiding something that is not appropriate necessarily for her children to hear. She was betrothed to my grandfather at the time.
Oh.
So the immersion in water to me is partly Indian Springs itself and the healing properties of the springs. But of course, when we say immersion in water, I also think of baptism.
Yes.
And there was something about that trip, away from the constraints of family, that freed her up in a certain way that we didn't see again. I mean, she went back home and she married my grandfather and so on. But that just stayed with me and helped me to see what an important part of her life that was.
Yes.
So maybe you'd like to comment on anything you might see in that dream fragment.
Well, Marion, I really think that you've got it. I really think that you accompanying her in the dream to the treatment place, which was going to include water, and such an association with that memory that she does write down, as you mentioned, it allowed her to open up and say real things,
Yes.
And so it's almost like an invitation for you to go with her for you to open up your real things.
Yes.
And how, right. And that's, I think you've got it. And I think the association with baptism is absolutely spot on. And the idea of baptism being immersed and all that means to those of us raised in the church, all the words that go around a baptism of rebirth and rejuvenation and cleansing of symbolically of the body, but then really we're cleansing our soul. And that's what this memoir seems like to me. It's a soul cleansing thing that you've done.
Yes, that's the way I feel too. And
yes, yeah.
And interestingly, in that same secretary, the very bottom of the bottom drawer, I found a letter that this young man wrote to my grandmother after my grandfather died.
The
So
one she fell in love with?
the one she fell in love with. So this was so many years later. You know, she went to Indian Springs when she was 20. And this would have been after my grandfather died. So this was 1946. So all those years later, and I think she wrote him first, from what I could tell, after my grandfather died. You can just see that she's looking back, and this is about the time she wrote her memoir also. And she wrote to this young man. And, you know, I think that sometimes relationships like that are meant to free us. They're not necessarily, they may seem romantic at the time, and they are romantic, but they're also touching our souls in a way that we don't forget.
Yes.
We just
Yes.
don't forget those relationships that
Yes. Yes.
come along. We are growing, you know, we are growing and changing.
Yes.
So I just think that that was a peak moment. It helped, the dream helped me, you know, with my own personal stuff, but it also helped me to identify, you know, just a very short passage, but I saw so much in it of what was happening and how she was changing.
Yes. I would have loved to have known what that young man, what attributes he had, what qualities he had that were that attractive and that compelling that she held on to him all those years and wanted to touch back to that after her husband died.
Yes. Well, the other thing, you know, I think it was a wonderful time because she did have so much more freedom than she had at home.
Yes.
But also, it was a time of first for her. She had her first taste of Coca-Cola. He took it to a nearby town named Flavilla, and she tasted her first Coke. She said, I didn't like it very much. You know, back then it had cocaine in it. So she may have felt a little better later, I don't know, but she didn't like the taste of it at first because it was different and new to her. So she's trying new things. That's the importance. You know, she's trying new things. She's expanding herself.
Yeah, that is just fascinating. You know, I like to think about a little relationship like that the same way we think about a dream. In other words, you know, like I said, whatever was compelling about him, whatever was so attractive about him, including the ability to go try new things with, you know, that all of the things that we look to that to say, what is that in me? What was being projected onto this young man that was so important that she held on to it all those years?
That's right.
You know, to look at I hesitate to call it a love affair, but certainly a strong attraction as something that can be looked at the same way any dream symbol can be looked at.
Right. Right.
So
it felt dreamlike. I mean,
yes,
the description of it felt dreamlike.
yeah.
So yeah. And of course she came home and married my grandfather, and she didn't, you know, she didn't change that much outwardly. I mean, she kind of went back into her own little shell, I think. And that's so sad to me, you know. But what choice did she have? I mean, back then she didn't have that many choices. You know, she was a wonderful pianist, and she did teach piano lessons for a long time. And she also did bookkeeping, and she also had a women's dress shop at one time. So she was innovative in lots of ways, but still the culture was not encouraging of her to just strike out on her own, certainly.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that I treasure that understanding, you know, of her, and also just about myself, that look for the things that expand us. And also, you know, I wanted to put the two memoirs together because we know so much more about ourselves than they knew back then. I mean, psychologically, I mean, all the things that have happened, you know, with Carl Jung and
Mhm.
Freud and Bill Wilson, and all the understanding that we have of family dynamics, of alcoholism, of so many things. And so I can see that her restrictions were cultural, and that we have grown so much since then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So say a few words, if you have a few words, about the relationship for you between dream work and creativity itself. What are your thoughts about that? What keeps you paying attention to your dreams?
Well, obviously, they meant a lot to me in this project because they
Mhm.
guided me. The first one got me going, the second one kept me going.
Yes.
And so there's not always a direct correlation, but I think that anytime we pay attention to our dreams, even if we don't write them down or don't
Mhm.
work them as we do sometimes with you, I think they just stay with us and inform us even without us knowing. And I think they expand us in just enormous number of ways. They help us to see the dimensions of ourselves that we can't see otherwise
Mhm.
because they're from
Mhm.
the unconscious.
So I think about dreams as coming from the same place deep within us as the creative urge itself. And that dreams are almost an expression of the innate creativity, and you can almost capitalize the word creative spirit, you know, that dreams are an expression of that creative spirit, and they're just so closely aligned that having this conversation, this dialogue, if you will, with the unconscious and with our dreams, to me, can't help but foster creativity in our waking life, expressed in a myriad of ways.
Yes, yes, I agree, of course. And,
Mm.
and the second dream is the fragment is even as interesting as the first to me because, first of all, Ganny's room was at the back of the house, but she had a great big picture window. And outside
Mhm.
of her window was this big oak tree. So I think that was the tree we were mulching and fertilizing. And then that's where she sat when she wrote her memoir. So it was a sacred spot.
Yeah.
It certainly, I think it was transforming for her to write her memoir
Yes.
because after that, she did she did some crazy, wonderful things, and they were all, and I kind of put them together in my mind. One thing she did, she bought some red tennis shoes, and that was great. The second thing she did, the family doctor she had angina in her later years. That's a
Mhm.
hardening of the arteries. The well-meaning family doctor said that he wanted her to smoke a cigarette a day for her angina. And so in her wisdom, she couldn't have known because the report on
Mhm.
relationship between cancer and cigarettes did not come out till later.
Mhm.
She couldn't have known, but she bought this long filter, and I called it her movie star filter. Hold that image in your mind. About that same time, she discovered Elvis Presley. Now, she didn't like him at first, but when she found out he was a Tupelo boy, she was crazy about it. So my image of my grandmother in those years was she has Elvis on the radio, she has her filtered cigarette, her movie star filter, and she's tapping her red tennis shoes. So, I think that within her limitations, she was expressing her soul.
You bet she was.
Yeah.
So so Marion, what has writing your memoir and having it published, what has that done for you? What is your version of some red tennis shoes?
Well, I've been going to a lot of book signings and giving some talks. And so right now I'm busy with that. And that's new, to see
Mhm.
different people, new people, talk to people, talk about the very
Mhm.
things I love the most. And I've had wonderful response, to my book, and that means a lot to me. So right now, that's all I can think about it. That's the evidence of soul enhancing experience, just the interaction with people. Well, but I guess first and foremost, I should say that my children, my son and my daughter were the two that were in crisis when this thing started, each with a different problem. And I wanted to be the best mother I could be for them, of course.
Yes.
And I knew that we could have a better relationship. That because of my family history, I needed to work on my own healing so that I could not react, but respond to their issues. And I think that's been like 100% better, at least 100%, maybe more, in the relationship with my children and my husband. But he, it's different with the husband. It's not as easy to define as it was with them, but with everybody, I feel a sense of authenticity, I guess you might say. And one more thing I just want to say before I forget it. That first dream seemed to say, okay, go find Ganny's memoir and see the wisdom therein. And I didn't find the wisdom therein. But then I looked again and I thought maybe the dream was just saying, go find your Ganny's memoir and write your own. The memoir itself is what it was talking about, not the wisdom within.
Then, yes. That is brilliant, Marion. That is just brilliant. That is just so good.
It's been quite a trip, quite a journey.
I'm so happy for you. And it's quite an achievement. I want to really express what an achievement it is to do this. And I'm so happy for you. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so what has the response been to this book so far?
Well, several people after, I met them at the book signing and other talk, have written to me, and I value that very much. And one just recently said, that I had expressed some problems that she had some similar problems to mine, and she could relate to them. And she, she talked about my being honest and brave. I get that a lot, being honest and brave. And she said, and this is what two other people have told me this, you didn't, when you talked about your mother and father, you didn't blame them. You just stated the facts about them. And I wasn't aware of that when I was writing it.
Wow, that is really interesting that other people brought that to your attention, and that was not a conscious decision on your part.
Right.
You just did it, and
Right.
other people noticed it. That is fascinating, Marion. That is,
yeah.
Our psyches are really interesting, and
they really are. Yeah.
Yes. So let me ask this last question of you. Have there been any other dreams since all of this that you think are commenting on this process or commenting on anything like that?
I don't think so. I've had dreams. I haven't had many dreams, and they haven't, gotten me up in the night for sure, or I wouldn't remember them. I know I'm having dreams, but I think that, my life is different right now. I'm into a social kind of life right now. A lot of interactions with other people. So I don't think my unconscious is worried about me right now. I think it thinks I'm doing okay.
I think you're right. I think that's what happens sometimes when our dreams sort of leave us alone. It's because we have completed a big piece of work.
Yes.
We've done the little evolution, and now our dreams are going to leave us alone just for a little while until it's time for something new to start. And this goes on throughout our lifetime, throughout our lives. So
and I really also want to encourage other people to write their memoir, because it is just so liberating. Even if you decide you don't want to publish it, it helps so much, and it helps you to see turning points in your life. It's like I saw Ganny's turning point in her life, and that helped me to know what to look for to find turning points in my own life. And it's just such a helpful, wonderful thing to do. And I started teaching a writing group at I live in Eastbrook, which is a property that has a clubhouse that we all enjoy. And I decided that it was going to waste, so I organized a writing group, and we worked in July as a writing workshop. And then one of the people in the class said, can we just keep meeting as a writing group once a month after this? And I said, it sounds good to me. So we continue to meet. And that's another exciting thing, because I want to pass this on, want to pass on my, excitement over this.
Yes. And so to everybody and anybody that is listening to this, let Marion's book be your inspiration. Marion is showing us the way on how to approach a memoir and how to tap into our dream life to foster our creativity. Marion, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today about dreams, creativity, and this wonderful thing that you have brought into the world. I'm in awe.
Well, if you look at the acknowledgements, I give a great tribute to you and to the Dream Group, and I'm very grateful for that.
Thank you. I'm very grateful. That it's very touching. Thank you so much. Thanks, Marion.
Great to see you. Bye-bye.